On it. Ooh, what's that?
I can tell you that people are doing it because they're independent, but there's no, I don't know if we've done any public promotion of that. I don't know who wanted the logo and the text, but I like it. It's very nice. It pops very well.
Oh, good. Perhaps I shouldn't record this, but it's essentially based off a ChatGPT prompt.
It's very simple.
So it wasn't done by generative AI, but it was used as input to generative AI to come up with some concepts, and then somebody actually designed it based on some of those concepts. Hi, shall I make a start? Welcome. I'm going to tell you something about a recently awarded project that we got. It's called Participatory PHAWM Auditing Workbenches and Methodologies, PHAWM in short, and never let me be in charge of acronyms. That's all I can say. It was recently awarded. We started on the 1st of May after we found out beginning of April, I think it was. It's funded for 47 months, and it is funded by RAI UK. We are one of 3 keystone projects that were funded, and more or less all of them went for 3.5 million in funding over the 47 months. So I'm leading this project, and it's very exciting, and I just wanted to tell you what that project is going to be about. Let's start out from where this all began, and there's increasing regulation coming in. The EU AI Act has just recently been voted in. It was kind of ironic. They voted it in literally a week or a few days before we had the interview panel for that project. But, you know, the whole sort of consultation had been rumbling on for years, so it was not really a surprise. So if you're not familiar with the AI Act, that's what it says. Essentially, all AI will need to be evaluated as to its risks, and I put in harm because that is really what it's about. What potential harm could it cause? Therefore, what is the sort of risk level? If it's evaluated to be of limited risk or harm, then you can go ahead. If it's high risk or harm, AI systems that negatively affect safety or fundamental rights then might have to register with the EU and be assessed throughout their life cycle. And then I posted here the kinds of systems that might be assessed as high risk. And there's an awful lot of stuff that falls into it. I mean, virtually any sort of AI system of note will be caught under the AI Act as potentially being high risk, right? And then it has that thing, if unacceptable risk, harm, threat to people, then it could be banned, you can't develop it. They nicely excluded AI that is used in the interest of national security or for military purposes. So, you know, you can still go ahead and build your killer robots. And it also captures generative AI, which needs to be transparent, right? Okay, so that's the context. And what caught my eye all the time is this assess throughout the life cycle, evaluated as to its risks and harm, right? So that speaks to regular evaluations, right? That need to happen. So what is the problem? Well, the problem currently is that all assessments are done by AI experts, or in the case of generative AI, by red teams. So literally a bunch of people locked into a room, bashing on their keyboard, trying to get generative AI to fail, right? And then picking up the problems and hopefully solving it. In terms of more technical things that are going wrong is, so bias is a technical concept, but fairness is actually a human value. So how do we translate one into another? Fairness often goes beyond what are called protected characteristics. So gender, age, marital status, all of these lovely things that are protected under the Equality Act. You know, nobody really talks about what fairness means in a broader context. And also a lot of fairness measures are defined by ground truth data and prediction accuracy. And there are some cases where, you know, that doesn't make sense. We don't know how good an AI needs to be to actually pass this assessment, right? There's usually some kind of trade-off between fairness metrics, between performance and accuracy. Often what is happening is that what stakeholders think is good or fair is not necessarily true for another stakeholder or domain experts or AI experts, right? Quite often we don't have access to the training data or the model. So how do we assess that? We can't expose some of the training data for privacy reasons. Or we might just assess it in the wrong way. We just pick a fairness metric and sort of optimize for that, but that's not really sort of what others consider as fair. So there's lots of problems with that. And essentially what it boils down to is whether you trust this AI guy to represent stakeholder views, right? So I won't spend long on this. There's lots of related work, but not specifically in this area. There's only sort of emergent work as well. So a lot has been done on predictive AI, simply because it has been around for longer. So there's lots of work done on how to measure fairness through metrics. Once you have a fairness metric, you know, that you're going to pick, how to optimize against it, how to do this bias mitigation. You have some tools like IBM AI Fairness 360. They are mainly used for by AI experts, but there isn't as much work for focusing on stakeholders who might not have that AI background. Some of my own work has started to look at it. And there's not really much done on the auditing or assessment process involving stakeholders. So everything is still sort of focused on AI experts. On the other side, with generative AI, you have some work on the auditing process, but not involving stakeholders. And then you don't really have many tools to assess generative AI. There's one that I found actually attending Kai just now, which is ChainForge, which looks quite nice, but again, it's only for AI experts. So what do we want to do as part of this project? We came up with, well, participatory harm auditing or participatory AI auditing. Participatory auditing, right? Where we want to empower this set of stakeholders, a quite broad range, without an AI background. So they might be domain experts, regulators, end users, decision subjects, whatever you want to call them, sort of they have some stake in the AI system, but they are not the ones building it, right? And we want them to be able to undertake these audits of predictive and generative AI, either by themselves, just interacting with it, or collectively, right, as a group. So there's there's more than those two challenges, but those are the main ones that we sort of want to address as part of our project, which is that whenever we talk about responsible AI, there's a lot of concepts that go along with that somebody without an AI background would not necessarily understand, right? So we need to communicate them, explain them in a way that is accessible to these people, right? Concepts, technologies, approaches, right? Lynn doing some work at the moment, just trying to explain fairness metrics, and that is really complicated enough, right? So there's some way around explaining what matters in an audit, right? Explaining sort of these background concepts, and then also that we need to support these stakeholders in carrying out an audit. So they need some tools that help them to carry out an audit. And then also, once they've done an audit, how do they communicate issues with that audit back to be fixed, right, and to be addressed? Okay. We put together a project team to address that. So we have 7 academic institutions involved. So we at Glasgow are the lead, but then we also have Edinburgh involved, but it's actually the data lab at Edinburgh. We have Sheffield, Stirling, Strathclyde, York, and King's College London. We have 24 partner organizations. So I just listed them here, but you just reading through them, you will see some very familiar names and some less familiar names. They can be sort of characterized as 3 different types of partner organizations. So we have what we call use case partners, and I'll talk about our use cases in a little bit. So they are involved in some detailed work around data sets or models or use cases that they have an interest in. Then we have what I call research partners. So they are places like Microsoft Research, who do work in the same area. And then there are other partners that you know, help us with impact and stakeholder engagement. So, for example, Scottish AI Alliance, where we're going to do some work reaching people who might want to conduct an audit on AI. So we have this large partner organizations, and as we speak, there's more people knocking on our door, wanting to join us, because I think you know, many organizations out there realize that this is increasingly becoming important. And then we also have an advisory board. So we have some of the partners in that advisory board, but then we also have other academics from Cambridge, Oxford, Trinity College Dublin. We have Scottish Government, Bamberg, CMU, and then we also have NIST, which is the National Institute for Standards and Technology, so in the USA. So if you are familiar with that area, Biden signed an executive order on regulating, in essence, AI in the United States, and then he passed that responsibility to NIST to execute that. So that's our project team. So it is quite large. At Glasgow, we have myself, Craig, Graham, Iyad, Alessandro, and Eva, all in computing science. And then we have Monica over in psychology, Yunyang in, I always get this wrong, information studies, not information science. Mark, who's over in urban studies. So Yunyang is in arts and humanities. Mark is in social sciences, and Zoe will work with Hyunkyung, also sort of from a digital humanities perspective. We're going to hire more people. So we're going to hire a human AI interactions research associate for 36 months, sort of more technical RA working on a work package on a use case for 24 months. We are just about to advertise 2 PhD studentships. We are going to hire an operations manager who does most of the admin and budgeting and chasing people for their budgets. We're going to have a training research associate or assistant, which is going to be part-time, but helping us with some of the sort of skills. And then we have just inherited a digital humanities PDRA that's moving partially over from Sheffield for a little while. And that's only us, right? There's currently 2 positions being advertised, one at Stirling's, one at Strathclyde as well. And then there will be more positions opening at other institutions as we need them. So, so what will we actually do with all of these people? In the project title, there was the Workbenches and Methodologies. That essentially means that we will build tools and processes that stakeholders will be able to use to do an audit. And we're doing that, taking a very multidisciplinary approach. So it's not just CS people forging ahead and building these tools and processes. We'll have digital humanities, social sciences, and so on also collaborating. So everybody works on everything all of the time. That means that we have a sort of multiple perspectives on carrying out stakeholder research, building and evaluating these tools and processes, training stakeholders in doing an audit, and then we'll also look into what we could do about certification. And that's not certification for the training, that's certification of the AI solutions. So all of our research is structured around 4 use cases. They are sort of staggered. So our first use case is in health. Our second use case is in media content. Our third use case is in cultural heritage. And our fourth use case is in collaborative content generation. So what we can do is we can run those 2 use cases in parallel, one about predictive AI, one about generative AI, and then we stagger the rest. So in essence, we can see how much of this use case generalizes in this use case. So we're a bit further ahead. And then that allows us to dangle off training and certification a little bit at the end once we have figured out what we need to train people in. Okay. I just put in for fun the objectives that we listed in the proposal. Luckily, I think we're still doing all of them. But it was really focusing on building these novel participatory auditing workbenches, these new methodologies that allow people to do the audits, embed this in future AI development and deployment practices. So, you know, building this network of stakeholders, training them, you know, educating the public, and then also we want to extend the network of people that are actually doing this kind of research. So let me tell you a little bit about the use cases. So we have one use case that is focused on health. So this is all about predictive AI. It's starting, well, it's supposed to start 1st of August and run for 2 years. So, you know, doing stakeholder research, building those tools and processes, and then evaluating them. And we're going to focus on 2 things. First of all, we're going to work with Public Health Scotland and NHS NSS. That stands for National Health Services Scotland, National Health Services, National Services Scotland, right? So those 2 work together, and what they have done is they have actually built a model from patient data that predicts a person's likelihood of being admitted to hospital as an emergency inpatient within the next year. That's called SPARA, right? It's actually running. It's calculated monthly for approximately 80% of all people living in Scotland. So probably, yeah, most of you will have had it run on your data, right? They know they are running it. They know it has biases in it. We cannot look at the model and the data set without jumping through some severe hoops. And also that means that, you know, it will never be available publicly to do an audit, right? Because it's all done on a personal basis. So, so that's one thing we want to look at. Stakeholders might be healthcare professionals, so GPs who might get this risk score sent to them and kind of go, well, how good is this, right? NHS decision makers, so people who plan using this model, and patients, right? How did I end up with this risk score? Is that correct, right? So that's one area that we're going to look at. The second one is the school attachment monitor corpus, which Alessandro has been working with quite a lot. It's a video corpus, and it helps, the model helps with identification of people with insecure attachment. So a medical diagnosis, well, psychological diagnosis. So it has known biases. Obviously, it's videos of children, so it has privacy issues. And if you get a bunch of psychologists looking at this data and this corpus and the model, you have problems with ground truth because they can't agree whether it is, you know, whether there is a child attachment issue or not, right? So stakeholders are psychologists, social workers, educators, and parents of children undergoing assessment. The second use case, which again is in predictive AI, starts in a year's time, and then also runs for about 2 years. We have a search engine setting working with iStella, an Italian company, and that is going to address problems with misinformation and information bias. And we're going to use search engine developers and search engine users as our stakeholders. And then we're also going to look at the Jigsaw data set, which is around hate speech detection. You have biases in classification based on the language that is being used. So again, our stakeholders here would be social media moderators or social media users. Cultural heritage, where we are going to move into generative AI, is starting right now, also running for 2 years. And there we're going to look at collections of historical material. And that will be provided by the National Library of Scotland, Museum Data Service, and the David Livingstone Birthplace Trust. So that is all around misrepresentations, hallucinations, historical bias, that kind of thing. And that those stakeholders might be collection curators as well as their users. And then finally, our last use case is about collaborative content creation or generation. Again, sort of moving slightly ahead, not starting until next year, where we're going to look at co-written Wikipedia articles. So how Wikipedia editors and generative AI work together to create a Wikipedia article. We're going to focus on health and non-English languages as well in that use case. And we're going to have project partners, Wikimedia Foundation, Wikidata, Full Fact, which is a fact-checking service, an organization, and the ODI, Open Data Institute. This is all about knowledge sharing, hallucinations again, biases. We're going to work with article editors, users of these articles, which might include fact checkers, journalists, and researchers. I mentioned that we're doing some training and certification. We're going to develop training materials for stakeholders that teach them something around how to conduct a participatory audit. We're going to run some awareness and training campaigns, and our lovely project website will eventually have software releases and methodology guidelines and that training material on there. And then we're also going to look into possibly self-certification initially, where if you've undergone this process of participatory auditing, you can sort of go, I've done due diligence, I've done it, here were the results, right? It was found good enough. Possibly later, we also are trying to see how we can tie that into regulatory frameworks. So, you know, the EU AI Act might come along and say, oh, PHAWM, right? How about we do a certification that, you know, then shows that you're complying with the AI Act, possibly in the future, right? Okay. In these lovely things, I have lots of boxes which say, oh, conduct stakeholder research, right? And build those tools and models. What do we actually mean when we say that? When we talk about stakeholder research, we're going to use some common methods and techniques, but we're also working across these disciplines. So digital humanities will bring their own flavor of doing their research to it as well. So it's not just HCI techniques, although everybody likes interviews and co-design. So that's primarily what we're going to do. And things that we want to investigate as part of stakeholder research is, well, what do they see as fair and good enough? How do we actually set up and support this audit? How can we extract fairness measures? How can we build new ways of measuring the quality of AI, right? How can we support negotiating about what counts as fair or good enough? How can stakeholders feed back about the results of an audit? What shall we do with bad auditors? So, you know, by bad auditors, I mean, oh, what do you do with those people that want to make it less fair, right? And what information and interfaces do stakeholders need to audit an AI? So that then will feed into the design and the implementation of the tools, but also the methodologies. So we have some outputs that are probably going to be design. We're going to build some workbenches. So based on the stakeholder research, we're going to design and implement these tools. And it's not just tools, it's also underlying algorithms and ways of doing that. So we'll probably develop some new fairness measures also for generative AI. Going to build some mitigation tools. For example, we're looking at multi-criteria optimization techniques, mainly coming from Sterling. Privacy preserving auditing, mainly coming from York. Reasoning over audits, right? So how to make sure that, you know, if you have a bunch of audits carried out over the same model or data set, how to combine them together. Definitely some work around user interfaces, which might include or will include some explainable AI, some explainable AI for generative AI, or, you know, information of what is going on there. User feedback integration methods. So how do we, what do we do with the feedback that results from an audit, and how do we improve the model? And then also, how do we guard against these bad actors? So some software, right? Building methodologies, again, based on the stakeholder research. We're going to probably do some co-design workshops, review some regulatory frameworks, think about collaborative practices, perhaps including sampling and representation, look into how this all fits into the development life cycle. When should you do these audits? Who should be doing these audits, right? And then also the legal implications of doing these audits. So we think we have a toolkit that's sort of you can pull out and go, oh, okay, I want to do an audit. How do I do it, right? Evaluation. We're going to evaluate not only within the use cases, which is, you know, obviously the immediate thing. So we're going to evaluate, does what we developed work within the use case that we developed it in? So does health work for health? But also we're going to evaluate between use cases. So does what we develop for health use case actually work for media content, right? We think that generative and predictive AI is sufficiently different that you need different ways of assessing them. So we're probably not going to evaluate between those, but we also want to do that beyond the use cases that we have. So if a partner comes along and says, "Ooh, that looks interesting. I've got a completely different model in this context," right? I mean, for example, we don't have anybody in finance currently, right? And a lot of all of these assessments and fairness is done in financial services. So if they came along and said, "We want to see whether your approach works for our context," then we're really interested in that. So that hopefully will allow us to improve these workbenches and methodologies. So we already have 24 partner organizations. So why do you think we need more? Well, we need more. What we want to do is establish this really big network of interesting parties. And I think the lowest form of involvement will be that they join a mailing list and they get nice newsletters and updates on what we've been doing, so they can then sort of stay informed and hopefully use what we've been producing. We're also going to have partner network meetings every 12 months. They're going to be likely to be in person or some kind of in-person element. And ideally, we have a public element to these as well. So people can come along after our network meetings and see what we've been producing, so open to the public. We're going to have advisory board meetings every 6 months. We're going to take part, we're going to have regular public events at least once a year. But then we also are planning to participate in lots of other public or industry focused events. So for example, Scottish AI Summit, Wikimania, various other things that we can think of. So where are we now? Well, we are currently in what I would call the setting up stage. We're still sort of finding our feet. We're 1 month in, but there's lots of stuff to do. So mainly around recruitment, right? Setting up the infrastructure, so setting up the website, setting up the meeting structures, really simple things that need to happen when you're setting up a project. talking to partners, actually figuring out, you know, how we're going to work with them in detail, and also shaping work. So what will we actually do in detail? So we have like these broad things that we're going to do, but how do we actually do it? We're also extending our network. So we're talking to potential partners and stakeholders. As I said, we have plenty of people who are interested in this and now want to sort of get in on our partner network. And then we're also setting up what I call communication pathways. So how do we talk to all of these people and who do we talk with? Because we also want to work with the 2 other keystone projects. We want to work with CDTs and various other things. And it's very sort of messy at the moment. Who do we talk to and how? So if you're interested in more details, get in touch. But I think that was my last slide. So we have plenty of time for questions. What am I not fine? To answer questions. Yes.
So I don't know what an audit of an AI system really means.
We chose audit because it is actually quite formal, but so a typical audit might be so usually it's against specified standards, right? So an audit of software, right, would be, does it meet the requirements and the standards of operation, right? So that would be a typical audit. If you transfer that to AI, we currently don't have any standards. So part of this project is also figuring out, can we set certain standard levels? The other part of an audit is uncovering where things fail, right? So the scope of operation, and that again translated to AI means where are you biased, where are you not operating as well as you should, right? And then the third part is, how can you fix that, right? So usually as part of an audit, you have sort of like, you must do this as a result, right? To improve your compliance.
So how easy is it to identify areas where it's not doing what it's supposed to do? For a large system which does many things, how many of you want your team of 3 or 4 people or something, or are you employing a team of AIs to test that AI? It seems hard to know when you. How do you know that you're sufficiently complete in your testing?
Yeah. Good question. Jill, I saw that you raised your hands. I come to you next. So all of it is based on stakeholders, right? So we're not going to go, oh, we're just going to develop more AI to test AI, right? The whole point is that we want to reflect stakeholder views. So that is the crucial question. How do we support these stakeholders in figuring out whether they've tested it enough, right? Whether they audited enough? Have they found everything that there is to find, right? So those are crucial questions that we hope to answer.
So some of those biases might not come out, or might be quite subtle. It takes a long time to come out, and you realise it's it's racially biased or something. It doesn't happen straight away.
Yeah. So and that is especially tricky if we don't have access to the training data or the model itself, right? Because then we are relying on information that is made available by people who build the AI, and then we need to go, how much do we trust that, right? I mean, that's in essence what we're faced with Sparrow, right? But you know, we have a good relationship with the people who built the model. They're quite open. There's lots of data and metadata published about both the training data set and the model, that we can sort of figure out what is going on there, right? But in other situations that might not be guaranteed. So one of big challenge, of course, is that we think this needs to happen. Stakeholders need to be involved. AI experts have their place in it, but you know, they can't be the custodians of quality and fairness. But we somehow need to persuade the organizations that build the AI that this is a good idea, and for that, I think you need to have regulation that forces them to do that. So hence the EU AI Act. Jill.
Hello. Okay, so I love this. Congratulations on an amazing award and on the team that you've pulled together. So Simone, you and I probably need a bigger one-to-one conversation about this, but just a few thoughts just now. Number one, so I used to work in tech audit years ago for Standard Life, which is a certified professional role that sits adjacent to the kind of accounting type auditing that happens inside consultancies and inside businesses to verify that things are doing what they're supposed to be doing and are you know, accountable and compliant with regulations and all the rest of it. So I think really what this piece of research does is highlight the extent to which that whole profession and function is going to have to evolve in order to be able to do its job effectively around this increasing presence of generative AI and predictive AI in those business places. So that to me suggests that there's a fantastic role for this project in informing that whole profession. So I would really like to talk to you about how we do that. If that's something that you have an appetite for at all. It's a profession that sits very strongly within the financial services sector, but not only that, again, a previous role I've done as an information and data analyst within the NHS, and I've sat through audits of our systems and processes for, you know, much simpler technology and process tasks by the audit organisation that exists to do that on behalf of the NHS in Scotland, and then there'll be a UK and an EU and a so on, other domain levels for all of that. So I think there's loads of scope here with what you're doing to take this into some of these other domains, but also, especially I think since you're building training and certification into this, there's, I think, scope to actually commercialize the knowledge base that's coming out of this research to then run as a centre or something that informs and certifies on an ongoing and professional basis what I think will be an emerging strand to these kind of professions and tasks that already exist inside these businesses. So chatting to you about how we involve financial services, chatting to you about how you involve some of those types of professionals, what their current approaches are. Your big consultancies as well, your big four, but the smaller ones as well, are all in this space and will be developing their own approaches to it. But, you know, joining all of that up and getting some kind of real industry standard and independently verified through your research processes for all of this. Loads and loads of scope. So can we talk, please?
Yes, sure. So one of the things is that, you know, existing auditors would or might be covered in this sort of range, and I just haven't, you know, kind of named them as such, right? Places like the ICO already do audits, right? So they are formally the regulators in the UK that cover AI, right, or AI related kind of things. And the thing is that they very much rely on auditors that are AI experts, right? And very soon, well, they're already overstretched, right? But very soon they're going to be overwhelmed, right? So how can we support, you know, other types of auditors to do this? So, you know, I think that is sort of important, and yes, extending that to professions that do auditing is kind of part and parcel of it as well. Any other questions? Yeah, sure.
Regarding the use cases that you kind of showed, you kind of centered these 4 examples, staggered examples around these kind of focused areas, and then you can do this cool kind of examining transferability between the stuff you find between them. I was curious about the why or how the 2 generative examples were chosen, because they're both quite interesting, quite specific, but semi-niche compared to what for me at least, compared to what I perceive as the predictive ones, which are a field larger scale in context. Was it to do with basically what like close ties with partners and what they could offer you to help integrate you into their data sets, this kind of thing, or was there a more kind of did you drive to them, or did you find who would drive to you and go, thank you very much, we'll have a...
It was partially, you know, the partners that we had. It was partly research interests, right? You know, in a way, so just to give you an idea of the timelines this all happened in. The core for this for proposals was released 1st of November 23. The expression of interest was due on the 16th of December 23, right? So 6 weeks after the call went out, and they wanted a consortium. It was not like you couldn't just turn up with your one university, right? They wanted a consortium, they wanted multidisciplinary, right? So 16th of December was the expression of interest. They did some sifting and announced who would go forward to the full proposal stage on the 5th of January 24. The full proposal was due on the 16th of February 24. We had the interview on the 18th of March, and we were told that we got the funding beginning of April to start on the 1st of May. And the thing is that they were going, you cannot have a project extension. You have to finish within 47 months, right? So you have to start on the 1st of May, end of, right? So the choice of some of these was kind of driven by, quick, who have we got? You there, what are you doing? Who do you know? So you know, almost it meant we had to have a sort of semi-fledged network already to pull this off. And so a lot of it is driven by, hey, yes, I'm doing something here. I have these contacts. And, you know, it's sort of nicely, was nicely different, right? And different enough. But you know, for example, we're talking to some of our research partners and they're going, well, we don't have anything in cultural heritage, but we have something generative AI that we could try out using your tools that you developed there, right? So we're going to address other use cases as well.
Your template study development, then once again do a wider transferability analysis later on. I think considering what you put together with that completely unhinged timeframe, this is amazing. So good job to you and everyone else who put it together.
As probably Lynn and a few others can attest, I wasn't very responsive during some of it.
It's funny that they could do that in 6 months, but yet all those proposals were submitted in August and September of last year. They haven't moved at all.
Well, you just need to do with deal with RAI UK and
I've seen RAI when they want to do it, they can.
I mean, it's interesting because they are doing this at speed, and you can see that they are deciding how to do certain things as they're doing them, right? And so some of the guidance that you would expect, you know, to be in place, like from places like EPSSC, you sort of submit them to RAI UK and they go, what shall we do, right? So but you know, a lot of it is sort of like given by the UKRI process. Any other questions? We have 1 minute. No. Okay, good. So just before I finish, so Lynn is working on this stuff already. And so the idea is that any PhD students who sort of do vaguely similar things, we can pull in, right? So we just make them sort of affiliates and they can come to our network meetings and project team meetings. So because, you know, some of their stuff is so similar, so they won't be funded by it, but, you know, they receive the benefit from being involved in all of these fun activities. All right. Thank you very much.